I think it's kind of funny that we use a microphone for small audience, but anyway, sounds better. So tonight I'm very happy because we talk about film als Idee, which is a very nice title, and I'm not sure about the translation, but anyway. With Birgit Hein. I'm very happy because this book finally came out. It contains a lot of articles that we knew about, but we could never read. At least I couldn't read because they were only available in German. And many of these writings by Birgit are really milestones in the writing about experimental underground, avant-garde, that thing. So why don't we start from the beginning, Birgit, about this text? I mean, in early 70s, 71, you already write a history about this thing.
Why should I do it?
No, I don't know how it came about, and
I was asked by the at that time very big publisher in Germany, Ullstein Verlag, and I was asked by the later publisher Kaspar König, "Oh, do you want to write a book on underground film?" So just when I was passing by in this bookstore, and I said, "Okay, I will do it," you know. And at that time, 71, it was necessary. We were still in the mood to promote avant-garde film, underground film. So I really felt the necessity to write about this unknown kind of film. And what I did, as I was also a art history student, I started, of course, with the 20s, with the film of the 20s, and the history of the film in the 20s, from the 20s to our time. And the funny thing is, when I reread it after a long time, I said, okay, was okay. You know, from the view of an art historian, what happened in the Bauhaus was Moholy-Nagy, Rothman, you know, the whole history of avant-garde film, which becomes now even more interesting because now we have media art, and it's really necessary to see where did that start? Where did media art start? So at that time I did it as a young art historian to try to establish the beginning in the 20s. And then I did research, of course, how was it in the 50s? And when I was reading this now after a long time, I said, this is a part which is still unknown. What happened from the 40s through the 50s to the second Knocke festival, which took place 58 in Brussels. And then to the next, the third Knocke, which became for us so important in 64. Of course, we in Cologne couldn't see the films, they were only shown in Munich. But from that time on, there was publicity about the American avant-garde film, underground film. And this was how Knocke came into our mind. So when Knocke 4 took place in 67, 68, this was the event in Europe. You had to be there, you know, and we were there. Okay, so just as introduction.
It's pretty good. You can go on. We only are 68.
We only are 68. Yeah, from 68 on it changed because then there was the first international contact. Before we started to work in Cologne, and there was nobody else to talk to. But then in Knocke there were the Italians, there were the British, the Americans, of course, you know, and yeah, should I continue?
Very much.
In the end of 67, as an art history student, I got a short grant to go to Italy for Renaissance studies. And the first thing I did, I went to a library to see whether there is a newspaper, where there's anything about the Italian filmmakers we had heard about. And I found the leaflet to the opening of the Italian Co-op, the first night of opening of the Italian Co-op. And of course I went there, and what was there? Gregory Markopoulos with his first film, Bliss. And I was completely overwhelmed. I immediately wrote home to Willem and my brother, we have to show him in Germany, you have to organize show with Gregory Markopoulos, which we managed to do. In December was the first show of Markopoulos in Germany, the very first show at the university in Cologne. And in Knocke, only 4 weeks later, he was there with Robert Beavers, and so this was, from many sources, a very important event. And after Knocke, my life story. And after Knocke, in January, we were asked from 3 journalists from the Cologne newspaper, who were film journalists, for a meeting, a meeting of the filmmakers who had been in Knocke. And there were 3 others from Düsseldorf, Lutz Mammert, who won the second prize, and another filmmaker. And at this meeting in January, we founded X-Screen. We decided to found this organization to show underground films in a cinema in Cologne, because at that time, film was not in the museums or in galleries, nowhere really. So we started to rent midnight shows once a month, later once a week, to show underground film. And this is so funny, we just talked about it, the competition of so many events now going on everywhere. With that program, at that time, we were the only ones. So we had no problem with any audience, because this was where you had to go, So now, jetzt gebe ich mal weiter.
Yeah, then the book, the book you wrote in '71 was called Film in the Underground.
Yeah.
So let's start from there, because we have all long discussion we had in Ashdod, experimental. We have a long discussion about words, or how to call the thing. Underground, avant-garde, experimental. We know that this is a discussion that started long ago, and on which most actually of the filmmakers and the artists making this movie refused most of these terms, like you, by the way. So, how do we call it? Starting from the point that we have to call it somehow, right?
First, I must say that I did not want this title, Underground, but the publisher, Ulstein, said, this is a title, no way. So I was not strong enough, and in the introduction, I say how stupid it is. As I already said in the introduction, that underground is a word for exploitation, exploitation word for kind of subculture. So I didn't want it. But then the discussion is, how do you call this kind of filmmaking? Or this kind of films. Of course, experimental was discussed. The other cinema in Germany, there was the other cinema, independent film. But independent film became the new wave of American Hollywood, of the new Hollywood. That was in America, independent film. So this also did not. I don't know. On the presentation of the book in Berlin, one person asked, so how do you call these films? And I said, I don't know. And my grandson, who was there, said, that was the only stupid question from the audience. So I'll ask you, how would you call it, this kind of film?
But, I think, first of all, personally I have a number of problems. One is that I don't see cinema on a timeline. Yeah. I see it together, which is not a problem, but it's already a problem, because also timeline, you can't really define it how you define classic American cinema, how you define neorealism. They have shifting definition and spaces. And also the other thing is that I completely understand that why experimental doesn't work, why underground doesn't work. In a way, also avant-garde doesn't work. Because, or at least it doesn't work for a big part of film history, I think. I have a tendency to say that I don't make distinctions, and a film by Birgit Hein or a film by Markopoulos are simply good cinema, and the rest is bad cinema. But the problem is that when you do a festival, you must give a name, because otherwise people don't come. So we have a problematic thing. So we actually chose to keep the experimental for historical reasons. I mean,
yes,
that experimental. And of course, but also it has the shifting meaning at the time. I mean, underground is not what was just called experimental in a way. The avant-garde was another thing than the underground. So it has, each of these names have a history in themselves, which leads to maybe the next question. Does this cinema still exist? Does it make sense to have a festival like L'Âge d'Or?
Okay, of course it makes sense.
Thank you very much.
And I think experimental is an historical name now, like futurismus, like all the isms in history. You know what you relate to, so this is a brand name. And I think it's completely correct to continue with this, because it has a history, and it's defined, And yeah, we just talked about the problems that films have nowadays anyway. A correct representation, films which we talk about films which are outside the Hollywood system. Hollywood system is also a reduction, but films that exist outside the industry or industry system. And there are not many 16mm films anymore, but and this is where we come to film as Idee. It's the discussion about the material, about whether magnetic or celluloid, which has been such a discussion, aesthetic discussion in the 80s, 70s and 80s, is now not interesting anymore. Now we are digital. The digital filmmaking makes the material. It's not anymore a question of aesthetic. But this film als Idee means when we go to the very, very basic definition, which was tried which, for example, Moholy-Nagy tried in the 20s, what is the definition of film as art? Well, for the art of painting, it's pigment. And the art of filmmaking, the basic material is light and time. And this is what the title refers to. The idea of film is light and time, the basic. And there are a different. Our filmmaking comes from that, in difference, for example, to like industrial filmmaking, where. But even now, so to make it shorter, now today in the digital time. The basic idea of film has not changed, light and time. This is what is so basic about it. Yes?
Yes.
And to explain the title, I was asked from Wolf Herzog to write about cage and film. And I named the article The Idea of Music, the idea of music, and the idea of film, which referred to Cage and Fluxus in the 50s, where I tried to follow this idea through the Fluxus movement and the new approach, also like Cage to music and other forms of art. And this is why the three editors took the title Film als Idee, Film als Idee. Questions?
But in a way, something that was very present in the cinema, in the underground, for example, was the capacity to disturb. Was disturbing. Was also disturbing, breaking social and or political, but mostly social boundaries. And what we see today, well, are there boundaries to be broken? I don't think so. And frankly, if I may say one thing, one reason why the film that opened the new Wash Door 3 years ago was your film Baby, was because I wanted a film that still disturbs. And I was extremely happy when I saw many people getting out of the screening very disturbed. And they found it, they had really problems dealing with the film, which is the reason why you were there, basically. But this is not, sometimes I don't, that component is gone, isn't it? Or am I becoming cynical and old, which I am, by the way?
There are always situations when it is necessary to kind of do something which is not in the normal, does not belong to the normal thinking. And I just wrote in an article, we don't have, underground is not anymore an interesting word. What we could say is subculture. Subculture could be the continuous relation. When there comes a situation that you feel you have to oppose to general laws, or it's too difficult to explain, you know. When the underground film started, there was still the pornographic law, there was still homosexuality was still forbidden, there was a paragraph against abortion, paragraph against. So at that time, for example, the pressure of society was so strong also that they had to, it was necessary that a new subcultural movement came. And you know, that depends on times, how situations, when there is a necessity for a new underground or for a new subculture, it will definitely come. I'm convinced. And this kind of filmmaking, what is so important about this kind of was that it was personal filmmaking, and you did it like people, like painters, like the other artists. You would do everything yourself. You would finance your works yourself. So you would work with film, with a medium of expression in your complete control. We always would do editing, shooting. Only development we could not. The 60mm had to go to the lab, you know. Now it's much easier. Even now you don't have to go to a lab. You can have your material on your computer, you know. So this is another step of independence to work with images, which is, to my opinion, very important. And we have these new films, for example, about the war in Syria, now I forgot the title of a new film who is really dealing with handy shots, an analysis shot in Syrian towns, an analysis of this war. You know, so this is, of course, Hollywood would do a different thing about that. You know, so these films, these images come from the source, and people, and there are again filmmakers who deal with that. Hilpe.
This thing about the video and the total independence, and in a way, going back to the issue of material of film, which, as you said, is light and
time.
Now there is of course there are more and more filmmakers, well there are a significant number of filmmakers and artists who go back to film after having gone doing other things for many decades. Now there is a going back to film. And of course a film has now become something that is not anymore what used to be. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, film technology was a common, everyday technology used by my father to shoot 8mm or 16mm of me, small. Nowadays it doesn't exist. It has become only a tool for artists in a way. So I was wondering recently, isn't that a shift? And this is something lost in this use of film material, because now it has become, is not anymore turning an industrial product into an artistic meaning. In a way, you were reappropriating a technology that was built to shoot Gone with the Wind and to shoot the holidays in Schwarzwald. But now it's not anymore. Now has become more elitist than anything because it's impossible to use it. Isn't it a dramatic shift in the way we use film? So what I'm saying is film today is not what film was. Film has lost its fundamental meaning and it has become another thing. So in a way it is even less, is much less revolutionary than reappropriating a technology meant to transfer a dominant ideology, which was the Hollywood and the television. You know what I'm trying to say? You were using something, the labs that developed the film that was made by Kodak, all of that was used to a completely different meaning that it had for everybody in the world, while now artists are using something that has no meaning for anybody except for them.
Yeah. I'm not very familiar with this new celluloid movement. I know that in Berlin there is a group called Labor. 2 or 3 films I have seen, they look to me like the new American cinema of the 60s. They work again with superimposition and a certain style, a certain image style. So I thought, okay, if they have fun with that, let them do this. And the same with Super 8. It's very expensive. Super 8 has become very expensive because all the labs, you have to send now your Super 8 to America. There is no Super 8 lab anymore in Germany, for example. To me, it's not. This nostalgic value is not interesting, you know. And when we started filmmaking against the big film industry, the aim was to develop this medium as a medium of fine arts, to develop a completely different approach, aesthetic. Can we use together with painting, sculpture, and ever, can this be a new medium, aesthetic arts medium? And my interest is, this is why I now shoot with handys, I discover a completely new aesthetic in this kind of shooting and this kind of how you use this medium. And this is what interests me. I have no nostalgia. I call them the celluloid fetishists. To go back or to use these media anymore. I'm through with that. Also with what my imagination or my image, my idea about image was possible with these, with celluloid, with Super 8, for example. But there was even normal 8, you know, and 9.5.
Yeah.
Malcolm McGrath's first film was from his father's 9.5, you know. it's okay, but the idea why we started filmmaking was to use it as a from completely different point of views. So, and this is, for example, the aesthetic of this medium.
Well, the other disturbing thing is that this ends up in galleries and in museums, which is something you understand were not very happy recently about. And you fought desperately so that your film was not shown in a museum, right?
Not if it has not opening.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, yeah, but these are two stories, you know. When we started to get into the art scene, of course, this was a big problem that film could not be presented like an object where you come and go whenever you want, or you want one view. The normal time a person would stay in front of an image was 1 minute, you know. With film, of course, time, that was a big problem. And therefore film in exhibitions, films were not shown in exhibitions normally. And when video came up in the 70s, this problem was solved, because you could project, you didn't have to project, so because you could present the image all the time. The installations which were worked out of that, like for example, Larme d'Acier, what was her name? French artist. A very great installation with many monitors. Was a completely different concept from a linear presentation of film. So when the installations developed, when the real installations developed, of course they had a different kind of visual information. We made films which had a beginning, a middle and an end. And of course for us it was impossible to just show them and somebody goes in and out. So when the first documenta that really had film as a department was Documenta 6, which is now called the Media Documenta. And this Documenta, I was responsible for the film department, the first film department. With Herzl, that was for video. And then there was also, for the first time, a photo department. And at the Documenta, at our department, we had the films were shown always shown a program at certain times. So you could get into at a certain time and see the film from beginning to end. The horrible thing now is that films are just taken and shown as installation, and you come in at the end and then you have to wait until it starts, and this to my opinion is impossible if you do it with a film which has a linear cut, which is not from the beginning the idea to be an installation. And at the moment we discussed it, it becomes a routine that films are just shown like that. In the beginning, when videos were shown in exhibitions in the 70s, there were no seats. And then in Düsseldorf there was the very first big Bill Viola exhibition, where he had a 30 minutes installation, which had in it a three screen 30 minutes installation. And what would people do? They would sit on the heating, you know, and they would try to sit anywhere, because they wanted to see the piece as a whole from beginning to end. Now, not now, but since the last maybe 5-10 years, there are seats in exhibitions, which was a no way before. You know, absolutely no go to have a seat in an exhibition. This has changed. So, at least, you know.
I must say it's a long journey of writings that starts with film in underground, 71, and it goes through until 2006. Unless I'm wrong, the latest, the newest text is 2006, talking about art and technology. And in all of this period, you did a lot of teaching with a lot of students, and you also kept doing your own films. So in a way, and you never stopped writing, basically, about any of, about this thing, let's put it like that, and films. But the situation changed completely. In a way, you were, how to say, institutionalized. You were a professor. Did this change something?
It changed very much my income. until
that was before the reform of state dry and so on. Yeah.
I was 48 when I got this professorship, and with like tenure, Beamter, I don't know what's the English word, employee of the state.
Your state.
And before I had not paid anything for social security and anything. So now, as this discussion, for example, in Germany is overwhelming, the problems and how they all make fear to the young people. How will it be? How will there be? I sit there and say, okay, at least, I know that they must pay me until I die, So this, of course, to have money every month was very, 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 very good. And when I started at the university, I had suddenly a technical range and people to help. We are professionals, This, of course, was an opening for myself, a real big opening. And the film, I only made my own long films from that time on. Before I had worked with my husband, Wilhelm, and the separation came in the same time. But then I could produce with my own money. I could produce my films at the university. This was really very important. I didn't have to rent an editing table or whatever. It was all there, and even people who knew. And the bad thing was, when I was retired in 2008, I discovered, there is a lot of lack of knowledge with the technique, because there was always somebody who did it very fast, especially with the computer, And I really had to learn a lot after now, as I'm now retired, but I have more time.
So basically, anyway, this means that you had a long and influence on the German experimental scene, going back from the ex-cinema to teaching in Braunschweig, in a moment when the Städel was also very active in filmmaking. There was a lot of film going on, and so you kept having this long impact on generations, actually, of filmmakers.
Let me tell you something.
Yes,
go ahead. For example, 3 years ago, Oberhausen is a short film festival, and one of my most famous students is Matthias Müller. He is really internationally very well known. And I was introduced by an American to some other American, and he said, "This is the professor of Matthias Müller." He did not say my name, I was the professor of Matthias Müller. That's why I'm famous.
Well, that's the advantage of being professor. So, yeah, but in fact I wanted to get to Müller, because this movement and the people working, you and the Städel and so on, they produced a lot. And there's a whole new generation. But I think that I will stop, because otherwise we start talking about like two old people. Is there any questions from the audience? Because I'm...
No.
Which is perfectly fine, being 8:40 and having a screening in 20 minutes.
Oh,
What?
and you have to give an introduction?
No. Just saying that we don't have to go on all night long. That's what I'm saying.
We don't want to talk until they leave by themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They fall asleep or whatever.
This is normally when I stop a discussion or like this, when I see that from in behind, slowly people start.
Yes.
But here we see everybody who leaves the place, right? Yeah. Okay. Then we say everybody who wants to talk. We
Yeah,
use
sure.
it
I
to
mean, you stay tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Good. Sure. We have more time to talk. Anyway, I'm very happy. I'm very happy that this book came out. I'm very happy to be finally able to read it. Also, do you know that the definition of English language is that helps. I mean, when you don't understand the German, complicated German philosophy, the way to make it simple is to translate it in English. You lose a half of the meaning, but you understand it. And this is actually a perfect definition of the translation of Birgit. It's very deep. It's a very good translation. It took 4 years to produce this, 3 years to produce this damn thing, because just an episode. I hope this to be ready when Birgit came 3 years ago. That was a plan, that she would come with the book and with the films.
Yeah.
So it's good because we have two reasons to invite you. First the films and now the book. And you should all read it. And it's already sold out. So take down the note of this completely useless publisher who was not able to send us more than, 10 copies at the last minute.
Yes.
And just buy it.
But the last comment to English and German, a comedian in Germany just said, if somebody doesn't speak English, he don't understand German. Because the German language in the meantime is so much, full with save the day, challenge and whatever. If you don't know English, you don't understand the up-to-date German anymore. Just this as an end.
Okay, thank you, Birgit. Thank you, everybody.